Hello and welcome. Thank you very much for all of you who are coming in today. And thanks so much for joining. I appreciate it's been a really busy week for everybody. For those that haven't attended one of these webinars before, I'm Alison Humphreys. I'm the MD of ProTax, part of the Pro-Recruitment group. I am here today with Nitin and Jack. Nitin, are you able to just briefly introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm a senior tax tutor at BPP with over 25 years CTA ATT exam experience.
Fantastic, thank you. And I'm also joined today by Jack Bonehill. Jack, if you could briefly introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Jack, everyone. I qualified back in 2019, I think it was now. And I suppose my involvement now with helping people pass the CTA exams is mainly through the podcast that I run the Tax Professionals podcast, where me and Nitin have done a bunch of episodes to help people. And I've done a bit of tutoring here and there as well to help some people who have been struggling with the exams.
Brilliant. So these are our experts today, everybody. So we are going to lean on these people. For those that have attended before, welcome back. Thank you very much for sticking with us. I hope the last few sessions have helped you. And what we're here to talk about today is results. Results day was on Wednesday, and we're here to acknowledge both successes and failures. It's okay for both. And we're here to talk about insights, strategies, what to do next, what to look forward to come May, what we're going to do in between now and May. And actually, if we've got any questions on the papers that we sat back in November, and any things that you loved, you hated, you got caught up on, that's what we're looking for from you guys today. So we are going to speak to our experts. I'll be asking Nitin and Jack some questions. We absolutely want this to be really fluid, though. Today it's very, very fluid. We want to hear from you guys, so it's big Q&A. And I think a few of the things I would encourage you to think about, if you think about the questions that you've got, for those who passed, what worked well for your prep? Why do you think you passed? Have you got any pointers on things you did well? I'm very much hoping, I've got a few people who have said they will be in attendance who were actually prize winners. And if you are here today, do put your hand up and let us know why you think you were a prize winner, because it'd be wonderful to hear from you. For those who struggled, what was your biggest challenge? So that would be really very helpful. So, come there, tell us about your challenges, and then any guidance or advice you want for the next few months. That would be fantastic. Moving swiftly on then, if we go to Nitin first, if that's okay.
Yeah. Sure.
For those who didn't pass, what's the best way to recover and create a stronger plan for their next attempt?
Okay, so I think if you've got a mark in the 40s, I think you've done really, really well. Okay, and I'm not just saying that. Anyone that I've spoken to, I've said you're technically very good, but it's partly to do with technical depth. Anyone getting in the 30s, it is, I think, the technical knowledge, the core knowledge is lacking. So I think first of all, the percentage also is an indicator of what advice you give. I think personally, for me, if you're a retaker, you need to, I'm telling everyone in February, and I'll be very quick here, to go back and read every single question again. Okay. Read the requirement line by line, look at the marking grid, not the solutions, and really think about where your gaps are. Okay. So February should be dedicated to addressing those gaps. Okay, not being defensive, learning to be diagnostic, not relying on questions, everything Jack and I have said over the years. Okay, and I think for a retaker, that's critical. Okay, so, and I think a lot of the people that were failing were in the 40s were telling, I had one student who got 49 in OMB, and I got the usual, I missed it by 1 mark. Well, no, you missed 31 easy marks. Okay, so don't look at the 50, look at the 70. Yeah, look at the 70, look at the 80, where it's where you should be aiming with a buffer, okay, to really, really help you. So yeah, and if you want more advice, you can speak to Jack and I afterwards. Ali will give out the details. But yeah, it's really about February's reflection time, make a million mistakes, start revising the areas you've got gaps on.
That actually builds into a question I was going to ask Jack later, but I'll ask you now if that's okay. How do you stay motivated, Jack, when you get these setbacks like failing an exam and it is just 1 point? And I know that 1 point you're looking at 31 points, not just 1 point, but it stings, doesn't it, when it's 49? How do you stay motivated, Jack, having sat the exams yourself and been through this, what other people are going through?
Yeah, so I suppose, well, I haven't actually failed any of the CTA exams. I passed them all first time, so I don't actually know for sure how it feels 100%. But I've spoken to a lot of students that have been in that situation. Well, let's face it, it's hard, right? Because if you failed, you probably feel like you put 100% into that exam and you've come out and let's say you've got in the 30s or 40s, so you're probably feeling a bit gutted. So it's going to be hard to I suppose go back and hit it hard. But I suppose what you need to do is just think to yourself that you probably didn't pass for a reason, and that means that you weren't ready to pass the exam yet. So, if you got the qualification and you weren't ready to get it, then you're just going to set yourself up badly for the rest of your career. So I think first, let's just acknowledge that it means that it's probably a blessing in disguise in some ways, because it means that you're going to be better after you've passed the exam. But then really it's just about really figuring out like why it is you failed. Like as Nitin kind of said, being open and honest with yourself to realize like why did I actually fail this exam without being defensive, without blaming it on the exam, without blaming it on other circumstances. Like what could you have done differently? What could you have done better to increase your chances? So a lot of that I think usually is going to be around technical knowledge. So I have quite a strong view that if you fail the exam, it's pretty much guaranteed to be down to technical knowledge. Now I know some people are going to say exam technique and other things as well. But the large majority of cases where I see people fail, it's down to technical knowledge and pretty much technical knowledge alone. So I think first off, you just need to acknowledge that you weren't good enough yet, and then I suppose come back thinking, I want to be good enough. I want to be a really good tax advisor. I want to pass this exam. I want to be good enough to do that. And then just going through and making sure that you brush up in all those areas where you're weak, where you need to be stronger, and going back, I suppose, with the view to being able to say that I've done 100% everything I can this time. So if I don't pass, I suppose so be it, but at least then you can go and say you've given it your all next time round and given it a good shot.
Ali, can I just add 1 point in there? I think the problem you've got is where people fail a lot as well is you've got one group who just have their heads in the study manuals, okay, so are not applying their knowledge. You've then got another set of students who just hit the question bank. Oh, I've done every question, thinking that's their access to passing, but they don't have. And when those questions don't come up, which they never do, because the examiner doesn't repeat them, they're lost. Okay, so we're dealing with two sets of problems. Okay, and the students that pass do a blended learning where they've got the depth, they've got the diagnostic skills that are different questions coming up. They're ready for that. They can handle it. That's your main problem.
Interesting here. So we've got somebody who has sat 80 in November.
Yeah.
We've got 42, which obviously we've said 42 is you've done well, right? In your 40s, you've done well.
Yeah.
But I'm talking here about the exam setup being horrendous, only one screen, invigilators being noisy and disruptive, time pressures. This person's finding it really hard to get themselves motivated with a family and the exams being difficult. What do we recommend? Is there a new approach for her to get back into this? What are we recommending for someone with this type of thoughts going around in their head? Is it worth it, she's thinking?
Well, that's a personal choice, isn't it, really? Yeah, that's a personal choice. If you've got, and I've always said this, if you've got family commitments and you've got other things going on, then now's not the time. Yeah, a lot of people do this with young children, and I just literally got off the phone half an hour ago where career pressures dictate this. And so and this is where this weekend should be about an honest chat with family, loved ones, work, okay, following week to say, actually, I can't cope here. I can't manage this. I might need to do this later on. Or some people are saying, no, actually, I'm going to put childcare in place. I'm going to make provisions. So there is all of that. Look, the exam hall, that's a CIOT issue. Jack and I won't get involved in that. There are headphones. Yeah, exams are always going to be stressful, the experience, we get that. Okay, but we're all adults here. CTA is the gold standard. It's the top qualification. We do have to prepare ourselves in every respect. I would always say to someone, if you've got a challenging work life, family life, think it through. Okay, it can be done, but it's not at the cost of your family life and mental health.
And we were saying that when we in the last webinar, we were saying, you know, everyone's got to be rallied around you. Your family, you've got to have champions. They've got to understand it's just a short time in your life, and you know, your mental health is more important than any exam, really. So I think that's really important to sort of take a step back, and I think that's really good advice. Okay.
Yeah, there's one thing I can add as well, if you don't mind, quickly. I think for someone like Georgia, when she's saying like there's things that were just putting her off in the exam and stuff, I think what she needs to do is focus on the things that she can actually influence or control in some way. She's not going to be able to control or change the fact that they've got one screen. She's not going to be able to change the fact that there's noisy invigilators. What she could do is practice her exam, like mock papers, etc., with one screen, making the environment maybe noisy in some way, so that when she gets to the exam, those things are not going to put her off. It sounds to me like she's put in an environment that she wasn't used to, and therefore it's put her off more. These exams are difficult, and everyone knows that. And you got to control or mess with what you can actually influence or control. There's no point worrying about the stuff that you can't do anything about. The exams are always going to be time pressured, but it's just worth remembering they are passable. People do pass these exams, and most people I'd say who pass do end up failing at least one exam along the way. So it's just about bouncing back and, you know, taking control of the things you can take control of.
I love that advice, Jack. Thank you. That's really good advice. Brilliant. Okay. For those that did pass, Nitin, what should their focus be as they prepare for the next module or the final stretch of their qualification if they're not now qualified?
So if you're moving on to the next paper, I think you've got a bulletproof method that's worked. Okay, keep going. Yeah, stick to the, you know, if it's your first time attempt, February should really be about knowledge gathering. But I also recommend try looking at past paper questions, not to do them, but get used to scenario spotting, issue spotting. So you're doing both at the same time. I do that in my TOLCG talk courses. We literally do past papers on day one of the talk course. Okay, so that students get used to what they're going to face in the real exam. And so there's got to be and also don't get bogged down in niggly rules. Keep it simple, and and there's lots of podcasts that Jack and I have done and we've done where there's and Autumn Murphy, giving a shout out to her as well. There's so much good advice out there, and stick to the plan.
Well, actually, somebody said here, a gentleman by the name of Ed Hall saying big shout out and thank you to Nit. Thank you for working with him last year on a timetable that works with family and children. So that's obviously been very helpful for Edward. He just passed the OMB Advanced Technical, and which is well done, Ed. That's brilliant.
Brilliant, mate. Well done.
Now looking to do the OMB APS, which obviously we know is a completely different, you know, not legislation, all about how you're going to work with a client and how you would advise a client. Tips on transition for that, he knows doesn't still start till March, but he's looking to get a head start. Someone suggested that he picks up some of the awareness exam manuals, as he has exemptions, so it might be a weak area. Does that sound reasonable? Nitin, we'd like your advice.
No, leave awareness alone.
There you go. Brilliant. This is why we're here.
Nitin, to be fair.
I look with awareness, with APS, guys. Jack, please feel free to disagree here, but I think in the transition, what I've told anyone that's doing an APS paper, go and get the candidate scripts, okay, off the CIOT website, and in the gap phase, just read them. Don't worry about what the question is. Look at the sentence structuring. Look at how they're blending. Look at how they're applying. The CIOT have chosen those candidate scripts because it's ticked a lot of their boxes. We are seeing so many good students failing APS, not because they're not technically capable. They can't write. They can't deliver a client-centric report within exam conditions. And even with me, I've had really good students pass this year. Okay, you know, a massive shout out to Anuja and Ed, you know, and sorry, not Ed, but Ed for OMBAT, but Gurney. So many good students have got through, okay, but they failed this paper a good few times, okay, only because their written skill wasn't on point, okay, and that's where so many APS students don't take it seriously. Okay, it's not about your technical, it's about a lot more other than technical.
Yeah, Ed is downloading them now, so he's on it. He is on it.
the biggest kind of thing people struggle with this exam is they find it hard to realise that they're essentially writing so that someone can understand it who is not a tax professional. So you've almost got to think before you even started working in tax, before you started your exams, would you understand that advice that you're giving to someone? Because if you wouldn't, you're not writing in an APS style. You know, so if you can think of someone that you know that knows nothing about tax, but is a fairly smart person, you need to almost keep them in your mind as if you're speaking to them when writing these answers, right? Because you need to be able to explain it to them so that they understand. And that pretty much is the key to APS. It's writing in a way that someone who knows nothing about tax is going to understand the tax that you're talking about. That is what it's all about. So you need to really be careful with your jargon, for example, like tax jargon. Are you using a word that they're not going to understand? Are you saying it simply enough? Are you talking about the things that they're even going to care about? Or are you talking about a really weird point that they're not going to care about? Like, you need to think about, if you're a client and paying for this report, is this the information that I want to have from someone giving me advice? And if you can do those things, then you're like 90% of the way there to passing this exam.
Ali, can I just squeeze in a quick example? So I was doing an APS question last year with my class, and it was all to do with a share sale. And you have the exec summary, and the exec summary is your 5 key points you want to deliver to the client. And one of my students, who was a retaker, actually put in that the client should file the return by the 31st of Jan 2026. I went mental. I went absolutely ballistic. And I said, if you'd worked for me, I'd have sacked you. Okay. And I said, the client hasn't paid for that. The client hasn't paid for that. Yeah. Then I then showed a script that a student had done really well. It was about, we recommend the client should sell the shares on this date because they can claim BADR and there is a CGT saving of X amount. That was genius. Okay. And that's what all of you've got to think about, is that the exec summary and the points you're delivering have got to hit the client. Okay. So it's a big learning curve for a lot of students.
Yeah, I suppose imagine that you're spending 10 grand on a report. Do you want to be told first thing that you need to file a return by the 31st of Jan? Something that you can find by Googling online in like 3 seconds. Or do you want to be told how to save tax? It's obvious, isn't it, when you think about it?
Yeah. And I think, like, they're just answering that question there, is those candidate scripts, not reading the question, but reading how people actually articulate themselves when answering these questions is so important.
Yeah.
In terms of timetable, this would be different for each person depending on their circumstances, but would you mind sharing a rough idea as to how did you study with all family commitments and kids, where you're revising in the evenings or just weekends? That's a question to Ed, so I'm going to leave Ed to answer that question unless he wants to come on and give us an answer.
Yeah, so I think Ali, I tend to tell people, like, in a nutshell, if you're working during the day, then you should really do Tuesday to Thursday study. Mondays and Fridays, for me personally, and everyone's different, we know that, I wouldn't encourage it. I think they're time to get used to the week, recover at the end of the week, and on a weekday do something that's light and fluffy. Yeah, do something if it's general refresh, because you can't, after a long day putting the kids to sleep. Okay, my kids are older now, but I get it when I did have them. Okay, when they were young, do something that's gentle, so at least you feel good you've done something proactive. Okay, so those would be topics. It could be admin, something light that just sits there. On a weekend, you need to go somewhere where it's quiet, away from the family, somewhere, go to the office, where have a plan of what you want to do. And again, we've done podcasts on, and you can talk to us separately on effective study plans. But it should be it should be a combination of learning your knowledge and then also looking at past paper questions so you can pick up the issues and scenarios. So it should be a combination of the two.
Yeah, lovely. Okay. And I think actually Ed's put some info down there as well for that person who was asking. So have a read of that. The answer's there. Yeah. Balancing work and study. A question for Jack, actually, this one, if that's okay. So how can professionals balance the demands of full-time work with rigorous exam preparation? And what strategies did you find effective when you were studying? Because obviously you're being pulled from, one end with your firms, and firms aren't light on you, are they? That, you're billing for them at the end of the day. The more they can get from you, the better.
Yeah. I'll answer it from the perspective of not having kids, because Ed's answer actually in the chat is for people who have kids, but I didn't have kids when I was doing it. I think you've got to be really selfish and protective over your time when you're doing the exams. So if you're paid to work a 7.5 hour day, because that's what you're contracted to work, that's what you should be working, so that you have all that other time outside of your working hours to spend on working on these exams. So the way that I personally did it is I aimed to basically spend about an hour, between an hour and 2 hours on 3 evenings a week studying, doing some form of studying, whether it's reading the manuals to learn the content, whether it's doing practice questions, whether it's refreshing knowledge in certain areas, whatever it is. I was spending that amount of time 3 days a week. I wasn't particularly rigid with the 3 days a week that I wanted to do it on, because if I came home and I really wasn't feeling it that day because I was really shattered, for example, then I just wouldn't do it. So I wasn't super rigid about it, particularly when it was like 4 or 5 months away from the exam. But then when it gets close to the exam, you really need to ramp it up. So I was always spending like roughly a day on the weekends doing studying as well. But then when it gets close to the exam, you need to be doing some studying pretty much every night. If you can take any annual leave off or get some more study time off, take it off and use it to start working on it. And yeah, probably about a month and a half before the exam, that's when you really need to be doing it like pretty much every night, and most of the weekends too. And it's a hard sacrifice, right? Like I've got someone that I know that basically was still going out to events and stuff and still going out with family and friends like a week or two before the exam. They ended up failing, non-surprisingly, because they hadn't realised that you really need to fully commit to these exams really to, get the pass mark.
Yeah, it's a big commitment, isn't it?
It's a huge commitment, and people definitely underestimate the commitment bit. Yeah, I mean, the options are basically you do a half-assed effort one time round, and then you have to resit, so then you have to spend double the time doing it. Whereas you're better off, I think, just really hitting it as best as you can that first time, putting in your all, and then trying to get the pass mark that way. Because resitting is just obviously an awful lot more time dedicated to exams, not only in terms of the hours that you put in, but you're stretching it out further into your life, into your working life, into your family life, everything. It affects all areas of life. So I just wanted to get them out of the way as soon as possible.
Nice.
Yeah. I also think as well, the problem is with a lot of students is that they focus too much on the question bank. Yeah, they kind of factor their time thinking, I'm just going to work around this question bank and I'll be okay. And what they then realize is when they get into the question, they realize, I don't even know what this is about. Okay. And they've left it too late. Okay. And that's a big problem as well. And so, yeah, this whole reliance on question banks need to stop. And they realize actually lack the technical depth that's needed.
Yeah.
So a lot of them get caught out.
Yeah, it's not like GCSEs or A levels where you can like just practice a method over and over again and then just get a question and reapply it with different numbers. Like you have to, there are similar thought processes, of course, but you really have to think like independently and uniquely on every question that you get put in front of.
Yeah.
So that technical readiness has to be there.
You've got to be flexible with your knowledge, basically. That's the way I like to think about it. You need to be able to apply it to the same knowledge to a completely different scenario that you've never seen before, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. Question here from a young gentleman. I passed my AT individuals. Well done. Work is pushing me to do my second advanced technical with the APS this sitting. What are your guys' opinions on this, given the fact that both exams will be the same topic?
Jack first.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, I'll try and summarise because me and Nitin have different views on this. I think ultimately it depends on personal circumstances. It is possible to do both in the same sitting. I did both in the same sitting, but I had very little commitments at the time. No family, no kids or anything. I didn't have to worry about any of that, so I could dedicate the time to it. If you're someone like Ed, for example, I definitely wouldn't be suggesting that you sit both in the same sitting. But yeah, it really depends on how much time you can commit to the exams. Nick pretty much advises against it entirely, really.
Jack, you know what? I'm gonna mellow on this one. Okay, so I'm going to give you two examples really quickly. I had two students in November. Both of them sat OMB, AT, and APS together. Both of them got told by me, you should only be doing one. One person passed both. The other, genuinely, I'm not even making this up. The other person actually has a breakdown, failed both. Okay, and so I do think it comes down to the individual. Okay, and I think you need to know your strengths. Okay, if you're doing it because you want to rush it and get the qualification, no. If you genuinely get that subject and you're all over it and it's something you're passionate about, you will find it easier. So it does come down to the individual.
Yeah. I will add actually that I was probably fortunate because working in employment tax, pretty much all my experience at work is in advisory or related to advisory in some way. But if you're starting like compliance, like personal tax compliance, completing returns, or corporation tax compliance, filling out returns, you're probably going to have little to no experience in writing advice, basically, which is exactly what the APS paper is about. So if you're someone in that circumstance, I'd probably advise against doing both in the same sitting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they're so different in terms of the attack that you approach.
Yeah.
But like you say, it's very different, and each individual is very different. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Jack, question to you. Post-qualification advice for anybody who's come on here that is qualified, or they're close to completing their qualification. What advice would you give on leveraging the CTA and ATT for career advancement?
Well, it's a hard one. I think the second you become CTA qualified, you're clearly more in demand because you can demonstrate to people with that piece of paper that you know what you're talking about, essentially. So that's when like the world almost opens up to you, I suppose, in terms of now you can decide what you want to do with your career. I feel like the first few years you kind of just experience it, if that makes sense. Whereas I think after you qualify, that's the time to sit back and think, what do you want to do with your career? So do you want to continue working for an accountancy firm? Do you want to work in-house? Do you maybe want to go more down a legal route of working in tax? Do you actually want to move out of tax entirely and do something else? Probably not after you just got CTA qualified, but it's worthwhile thinking about at this
Let's
point.
hope not. Yeah.
Yeah, and thinking about really what you want out of your career. Do you want to potentially become partner one day? Do you want to be a head of tax, or do you want to be a senior manager, or do you want to be self-employed and run your own business? Because if you can think about what you want long term, you can start working towards it bit by bit. You probably do want to just, celebrate a bit and enjoy the fact you qualified a little bit first, maybe for say 2 to 3 months or something like that. But then I would really recommend sitting back and thinking, where do you want to go with your career now, so then you can start moving in the right direction.
Yeah. And I always say to people, sit tight for 6 months. Like, you don't have to move straight away just because you passed your exams. I know that a lot of people think, right, I've passed my exams, now I need to start looking. It's okay to sit tight, because actually what tends to happen is people start looking, get a job offer, and then they go and speak to their employer, and their employer's like, well, we were going to sort something out for you. You've only just passed your exams. We were going to promote you to this, or we were looking at this avenue for you. And then they're torn because they've got this new offer and they've got this, so just sit tight and see what your current employer does. If you like them and you like the firm that you're at, sit tight, see what they're going to do for you, see if they're on the same wavelength as you. And actually, because that could be right for you. You spent the last 3 or 4 years there, hopefully, training. They've supported you. They've financially put you through this massive exam. See what happens for you.
Yeah, the only thing I would say differently is because I'm a big advocate of like taking control of your own career. So rather than waiting for them to come to you and saying, this is what we've got planned for you, why don't you go to them and say, what have you got planned for me? Or this is, or even better, this is what I want to do. Do you know what I mean? Be proactive about it.
Yeah.
And most of the time, your employer will probably be able to accommodate what you want, as long as you're not just saying, I suddenly want to move to HR or something like that. If it's tax related and it relates to the tax team that you're already in, you're probably going to be able to do it. And if not, there might be an opportunity for a secondment instead. I stayed at the firm after I qualified for another like 5-6 years, so I didn't just move on straight away.
Yeah. I think I like that, taking control of it and speaking to your firm about what you want and what they can do for you. Right, I've passed now, where am I going?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Exam techniques, Nit. What exam technique webinars have we got to look forward to in advance of May for all these people that are sat here now? What have we got to look forward to? What can we expect?
Okay, so make sure you go onto the CIOT website, because in March there will be the exam skills focus sessions. You've got those for OMB. I'm doing the corporate one for APS. There's Tolly's, Kaplan, and BPP get invited to do various sessions. Look on the CIOT website. Alison and I are going to be also running further sessions. We're thinking of doing one on APS. Okay. We're not sure on the format just yet. We were talking about that just before this session, but we're going to make sure it's going to be value added. We possibly may even debrief an OMB APS paper with you to show you how to plan it, how to pull it all together. So that will depend on demand. Okay, so I think we're going to put some polls out in the next few weeks to gauge what you want actually, and also let Alison know. Let Alison know what you want. So there will be at least a few more sessions coming through at the right time, and we'll try not to clash with the CIOT. But do watch out for the CIOT sessions. They are value for money. They're brilliant.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. And then a last question for you, Jack. Are there any areas beyond exams that students should focus on to succeed in their careers? Because obviously this is the start of it. But once they've finished their exams and they've become qualified, what else should they be doing to advance their careers?
For me, it pretty much just boils down to trying to get as good as you can be, in different areas, whether it's writing advice, whether it's doing research, whether it's delegating, whether it's leading a team, whether it's winning work. Like, you need to get better at the skills that relate to working as a tax professional. But the reason I advocate figuring out what you actually want to do long term is because there's different skills needed for different jobs ultimately. If you wanted to become a partner in an accounting firm, that skill set is going to be very different to an in-house head of tax, for example. So just start working on those skills that are going to help you get to where you want to be. So that means every time you get a chance to do anything at work, make sure you just put your all into it. Try and do your best. Take on board feedback from people. Listen to what they have to say. Seek out advice from others. Look at what good looks like. So if you can get your hand on, say, a report that someone else has created that is really good, and they're good at writing advice, then have a look at that, see what they've done, and try and understand why they've done things. Basically, just try and soak up as much information and get as much benefit from every experience that you get in the working hours. And if you've got something in particular that you want to work on, try and seek it out, try and get yourself on it without just waiting for someone to come and say, do you want to come help us on this, or something along those lines.
Can I also add in, Alison? I also think in the workplace, you also want to look for people that you look up to. So if there's mentors or role models, and I think there are certain people that were instrumental in my life at KPMG and PwC that also helped me grow post-CTA. Okay, and they're also good people to go to who will give you advice as well as to what to do, what courses to go on, because many of your employers will have amazing courses. I went on a presentation course at KPMG, game changer. So yeah, often we can get a bit of lethargy post qualification. I don't want to do any more, but now's your time to grow in a good way. And like Jack says, take control.
Yeah. I think one of the things I attended something yesterday, and it was all about advancing your career and being the best version of you. And what stuck with me, they drew like a pie chart. So there's a huge circle on this presentation, and the top half was broken into two quarters, and P was in the first quarter, I was in the second quarter, and then the bottom half just said E. P was the performance bit, so the bit of your actual job that you do. So whether it's tax advisory, tax technology, whatever it is you're good at, a quarter of it is about that. The other quarter is your image, not what you look like, but how you come across, how you are positioned as people, what people in your firm think of you, and how you are thought of as an individual. Can we put that person on this client? Can we send this person to that client's lunch, whatever? And then the E, which was the other half, was exposure. And people knowing you. If we look at Jack, the amount of exposure he puts into his career has given him the advancements he needs, and it's made him a little bit famous, hasn't it? But when we talk about being that little bit famous, it's partners looking at you, it's heads of tax knowing about you, whatever you want to be going into, it's having yourself out there on LinkedIn, it's attending networking seminars, webinars that will advance your career, getting your name out there so people know you. And half of it literally is exposure, so that people know who you are. If your CV is put under a partner's nose or a head of tax nose, are you just a number, or are you that person that, I know that guy from PwC, I know that guy from Deloitte? Or is the head of tax or the CFO tapping on your shoulder saying, come and do a secondment with me, we want you full-time in a minute, you'll be my next head of tax? And a lot of it is exposure and networking. From a recruiter's perspective anyway. We've got some questions, actually, if I could just go through that. And actually, if you want to start flooding your questions through, now's the time. Georgie has said another one. She's the lady who spoke about balancing things earlier. She said, if I do choose to retake, what approach do you suggest? Either going straight to exam papers and then look up weak areas, and completely leaving the question bank alone.
Do you want me to take this one, Nick, or do you want to take it?
No, you go for it, Jack. Go for it.
Should I go for it first? Yeah. I mean, for me, it's a hard no going straight back to practice papers and things like that. Every person I've worked with that's failed before and then passed, I suppose, next, is they've gone back to basics, I suppose, figure out where their weak areas are. So the way I recommend you do that is you have the detailed contents page in your study manuals that lists out like all the topics and all the subtopics. Go through that and realistically mark yourself like how good you are. You can do that like maybe out of 10 or maybe bad, good, excellent, something like that. Just rate yourself. And then what you'll end up having is like obviously the list where you're the weakest, and that's where you should start. I think you need to brush upon your knowledge there first, maybe even do some practice questions specifically on those topics to help you there. But I certainly wouldn't be going straight into doing exam papers, because what's going to happen then if you start doing that now, by the time you get to April and May, you're already going to have gone through them all. So then if you're repeating them, you're literally just doing a question you've already done before. And coming back to my point before about flexibility, you're not training that skill of being flexible then. You're just checking whether you can remember a question that you've already done before. And I don't think that's going to help you to pass the exams personally. Have you got anything to add, Nitin?
Yeah, just similar to you, I think you can go through the contents page. I prefer using highlighter pens. I'm a little bit more like visual. So if you're happy with a topic 100%, just highlight it in green. Okay, where you've got a medium bit of knowledge, yellow, and where it's literally I don't have a Scooby, red. Then that will also help you. It will help how many reds and yellows you've got. That will help you. As a read, I agree with everything Jack says. I think technical depth is key. I also think you need to in February not do the question. You need to start connecting what you've got in knowledge to be able to spot scenarios. Yeah, so that you can also address where your gaps are there as well. So reading and reviewing questions like we talked about is key. And I also want to say really quickly, if you're retaking OMB AT, OMB APS or TOLCG AT or APS, email me, contact me, because we do have resources available to help you. So yeah, you may want to have a specific chat with me within the next 48 hours personally.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for offering that, Nick. It's brilliant. Someone's just asked here, what study techniques do you recommend to ensure you gain the skill of flexibility to apply the tax rules to any scenarios that could pop up? And I suppose you've just answered that, and it's just being as technically brilliant as you can be by identifying your weak areas, focusing on those.
Definitely part of it, yeah. When you go in.
So really quickly, so when I ask a student what are the conditions for a shareholder to sell shares and BADR, every student will ream off the 5%, the trading company working 24-month rule. And I'll say, is there anything else? And they'll say, no, that's it. I go, no, you're wrong. You're absolutely wrong. And that's the problem. They don't have the technical depth, because if you don't own 5% of all 4 bits, then there's a notional sale proceeds rule. Does that make sense? And that got tested. So that proved my point. That student actually didn't know everything about BADR. Yeah, what they've convinced themselves they have. Okay. And so it kind of then, and that's where you've got to be honest, is you've got to learn it through transaction. Don't just learn rules. Think about, how am I going to fail BADR? How am I going to fail EMI? How is my purchase of own shares going to go wrong? Because that's what the examiner is going to test you on. They're going to give you a problem that potentially could go wrong, which you've got to spot. And that's what these students aren't doing. They're learning the rules, but they're not thinking about them and twisting them the other way. Go on, Jack, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much what you're saying. You got to go both ways. I think when you're learning the material, I think you should be thinking like, when could this be relevant? Like, what situations could this apply to? Have you had anything at work where it's relevant, where it's cropped up, or can you think of any scenarios where it might be relevant? Because you need to be able to go both ways. You need to be able to go from the rule to the scenario, and you need to be able to go from the scenario back to the rule as well. So you need to be able to go both directions. So you need to be training that really as early as possible. And if you can do that, that will give you that flexibility. And also, I think one thing you definitely shouldn't do if you're trying to train flexibility is do questions that you've already done before. Because I think the second you're doing that, you're not training flexibility. You're just checking whether you've remembered something or not. And the fact is, you're going to at least remember some of it. So that's going to take away from how much you can get in terms of getting better at being flexible. So try and do as many new scenarios, new questions as possible.
And I just want to add something in. When you're studying as a student, there are 2 types of conditions. There are those conditions that are prescriptive that you can't mess up. For example, purchase of own shares. Okay, you have to own the shares for 5 years. Okay, you can't mess that one up. But within that, there's also a condition. It's got to benefit the company's trade, which is a subjective condition. So in your prep, you've got to watch out for that one, because that's the one where the examiner could wind you up. Okay, and you may have to discuss, actually, this hasn't been met. So that's where Jack and I are talking about the flexibility, is in those subjective conditions. So again, that will also help you on the day in the exam.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'll give one other example as well, because I think probably everyone's done a personal tax paper at some point, whether it's at ATT or CTA. Like the difference for me for being able to pass CTA is if if someone has a company car, let's say, you probably know there's a benefit. But let's say, I don't know, that you knew that someone had a company car and they weren't allowed to use it for private use, or that they were only allowed to use it for private use in certain circumstances. Do you know whether there's still a benefit or not? Because if you don't know those rules well enough. They need to be able to give you some information, and you need to be able to go, I know the company car rules apply in this case, and there's a benefit because this condition's met, this condition's met, and this condition's met. Or the opposite, there's not a company car benefit because this one condition isn't met and they all need to be met. You literally need to know pretty much everything about that rule to be able to be flexible with your knowledge.
Okay, great. Okay, so technical depth is obviously extremely.
It's a big thing, yeah. It's my biggest thing I always talk to students about, because pretty much everyone I have tutored has come to me and gone, I think it's exam technique. And then I sit down with them and go through one chapter that they think they're really strong on and show them like the things that they're missing, basically. And the second that they change that mindset to realize how much they actually need to know on each chapter, that's most of the way to passing these exams.
Okay. Another question here is it worth asking for the marks breakdown for the paper?
Jack, I'll let you do this one.
I've got no opinion on it, to be honest, so you're probably better to do this one.
Look, so I had a student who got 49, asked me the same question. I've marked real exams for other bodies, and usually when you're at 49, okay, they would have done a triple moderation, or they should have done. Okay, in my 25 years of teaching, I've only ever had one student who got 47 get up to 52 in my 25 years. Okay, so take that into account. Okay, the CIOT marking process is pretty robust. Okay, but yeah, so if it's going to make you feel better and give you some reassurance, then go for it.
Would a marks breakdown, tell you where you were stronger than where you weren't?
It literally just tells you, yeah, because I think some students sometimes think I've done really well. And so it kind of helps, kind of in their own sense, gives them a little bit of closure, thinking, yeah, I was right, I smashed that one, it was that question, or it can go the other way, where, yeah. So someone maybe a bit too overconfident.
Okay, fair enough. Someone here has said, Nitin and Jack, if one's pretty much gone through all the past papers, how can one practice flexibility?
Jack, can I go through this?
Yeah, you can, yeah, go for it.
It's checklists. Yeah, it's no different to a client meeting. If you've got 4 clients coming in selling a building, okay, you've got to have the checklist. Is it trade use? Are there fixtures in there? Okay, and then depending on their responses, your advice then gets tailored. Okay, and that's what Jack and I talk about, is having your technical depth. Okay, that you know what questions to ask, you know what issues to spot out, to look for. Stamp duty, land tax, it could be, one could be residential, one could be commercial. So all of these things will then tailor the advice. So the checklist is the best way to go. Jack.
Yeah. I think, just to be clear as well, when it's talking about checklists, because obviously with CTA it's closed book, so you cannot take them into the exam. So it's pretty much creating that checklist, but then making it mental, I suppose, or being able to find it in the legislation so that you can go through it in the exam. But I'm sorry, 2 seconds. We've got to get the door, everyone, because the dog's going off. So 2 seconds, sorry, I'll be back.
The joys of working from home.
Yeah. So just talking about the checklist. So again, for example, if you've got a company buying shares in another company, my checklist to my students would be stamp duty, legal fees, 75% loss group acquisition. Then you've got the different losses, current year losses, brought forward losses, capital losses. So this is like a nice checklist of the issues examiner can test. So that will give you flexibility and adaptability to different questions.
Okay.
Yeah, cool.
Excellent. How important is legislation use in passing the advanced technical OMB? So I'll just repeat that for Jack. How important is legislation use in passing the advanced technical OMB?
I think it's paper specific, if I can jump in, Jack. So
Yeah,
I think for Libby and I say for OMB 80, minimal, other than admin. For TOLCG, I do have some of my favorite section numbers where I think the legislation would save you, like on demergers and various bits of admin, you need leg. Individuals advanced technical, again, from colleagues, there are certain bits where I think the legislation's amazing. So it does depend per paper. Jack, over to you, mate.
Yeah, I use the legislation a lot in preparing for the exam because I kind of made sure everything was highlighted and I knew where things were, so that I knew where it was if I needed it. Because obviously a big part of CTA is there's so much content and it's pretty much impossible to remember like every single condition or the fine details of every condition of every tax rule. So it was a bit of a fail safe for me. So in the exam, if I wasn't sure and I had the time, then I would go and look at it to make sure that I definitely got the conditions right and I picked up all the finer details. So I was ready to use it. So I think my advice is be familiar with it, be ready to use it if you need to, but don't rely on it. Like you can't spend all the time in the exam looking at it because it takes time to find it, it takes time to read it, it takes time to digest it, it takes time to apply it, and you won't have the time to do that on every single question. So yeah, have it there in case, I would say, but don't be over reliant on it.
Yeah.
Okay. For retakers, at what point do you suggest we should start question banks, past paper questions for the May resit? When should they start doing that?
So we've kind of covered this already a few times. So like we said, and Jack and I have given like address your technical knowledge. I think February should be again technical knowledge, get it up to a good level. Read papers in terms of proper question practice. That should under time conditions and all the other bits should happen in April. Okay, because you've got February and March to really get yourself into a good position. Okay, where you become more diagnostic, build up your checklist. April is the time, the month before the exam.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got nothing to add.
Great. We don't appear to have any more questions. I suppose it's just in summary, from what I've got from this. February is reflection time. It's about being honest with yourself. It's about looking at where your weak areas are. If you have passed exams, you've obviously got a bulletproof way of doing things. Carry on, keep going, and use that bulletproof method to get you through your next exams. Obviously understanding that the AT and APS are very different in their approaches. If the exam environment is not right for you, change up your studying so things like that are out of your control don't affect you on the day. We know that walking into an exam is going to be a pretty horrific experience if you don't like that type of thing anyway. Get yourself used to it so that it doesn't distract you on the day. Transitioning from AT to APS, reading candidate scripts. And making sure that not necessarily about the question, it's more about how people are writing these. The CIOT have put them on there for a reason, and it's because the APS is marked on you being a tax advisor, not necessarily how much legislation you know, because they test that at the AT stage, right? Technical depth is really important. We've talked today some nice techniques there about listing out the areas of technical ability and green highlighting everything you're brilliant at, red highlighting what you're not at, and focusing on those weak areas and getting yourself up to scratch so you do have flexibility to answer things when different scenarios pop up at you. We talked about checklists and having checklists for every scenario so that you can battle questions from any different angle. And we touched a little bit on career development. Once you pass these exams, taking your career by taking the ball by the horns and actually doing something. Don't just sit there and wait for things to happen. Ask your current employer, make yourself visible, get yourself out there. But I think for most people here today, it's just about getting through these exams. And we as Pro will send you an email and ask you what you want, and then Nitin, Jack and I can deliver that for you. Let us know what you want help on. Listen to Jack's podcasts. The
They're
tax
brilliant.
professional
They're
podcasts, they're so good. I've listened to them and I'm not even a tax professional, right? Because they've got humor in there, they've got knowledge in there, they've got guest speakers on there, and these people are here to help you. They've done it, they've been in your shoes. Nitin, Jack, anything else to add that I've missed there from my summary?
Just very quickly, again, like I said, if you're retaking, we can help you at BPP. We've got lots of resources that Jack and I have kind of put together and we've collabed with other people on. And look, I'm going to say this. I know we keep talking about CTA is hard. I think we make it, okay, it's not a walk in the park, but they are passable. people do pass these exams, okay, you do need to have the right mindset, the attitude, the time, the commitment, the support. Yeah, and I think a lot of people kind of drop the ball here a little bit with all of that. Okay, and you've got to make all of that fit. The stars need to be aligned for you to go in and perform and smash it. And so if you ever fancy a chat, I'm around, Jack's around. Just reach out to us. But yeah, and good luck. You've got
That's
this.
it, isn't it? You're not alone in this. There's a whole community of people here
Yeah.
who are all in the same boat. You've got people out there that will help you. Don't feel alone. Reach out to people and ask people for their help. Oh, we've just had another. Oh, you've fine, perfect. I think that we are creating this community of people that are learning exam techniques and that are, all working together to get through this. So let's continue with that and get these people qualified.
Can I,
Yeah.
sorry to interject, sorry, Jack, my apologies. On the
No.
APS paper, something just because of what question I got asked that came through just now, we are seeing a lot of people sit the APS paper where English isn't their first language. Okay. Yeah, it's a struggle. Okay, and it's really important that if English isn't your first language, you might, and I've actually recommended this to a few students. They've actually had to get a little bit of support from an English tutor just to help them with the confidence of being able to write full sentences, because in advanced technical, they just want the technical knowledge. They're not going to measure you on how poorly it's structured, whereas APS they do. Okay, and that's why a lot of people are not hitting that valuable 3. Okay, so yeah, so sorry, that was a problem. Sorry, Jack, my apologies.
Yeah, no, the only thing I would add, to be fair, is I think all of you on here probably know this, but if you have failed an exam and you're now resitting, like something needs to change. Like, don't just go back and do the exact same thing that you did last time, because the chances are the problem was in the way that you prepared for the exam. So just make sure that you take on any advice about like how to prepare properly for these exams and tweak your approach somewhat so that you're doing it differently this time, and hopefully differently enough so that you get the result you want this time.
Yeah, it's definition of madness, isn't it? Keep on doing what you're doing, you'll get the same result.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good phrase in this case, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the only thing I'd say as well is, so if you want to just get an easy list of all the CTA related podcast episodes, the best place to go is on my website, so the taxprofessionalspodcast.com. And if you go over to the podcast bit, there's a drop down menu and there's a bit that says ATT CTA. And if you click on that, you'll get all the ones that are just related to ATT and CTA. So you can easily find the ones that are going to be helpful for you then. But we've pretty much covered everything at this point. Nitin has been the guest that's come on the most by far. So pretty much every other guest only comes on one time. Nitin's been on about 10 times at this point.
I'm honoured.
Privileged, yeah. So reflect, guys, reflect on your time, your results. And now I think it's super important to look forward and not actually sit down and dwell too much if you didn't get the results that you were looking for on Wednesday. Brilliant. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. It was great to see you. Thank you, Nitin. Thank you, Jack. Thanks to my team here today, and we will see you all on the next webinar.
Thanks, Ali. Thanks, Jack. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah,
Good
thanks,
luck.
everyone. Good luck, everyone.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.